Good evening, everyone. Look at that magic, everybody stop. Hello everyone, thanks for coming along tonight to the YES Kirkcaldy Hub General Election hustings. I'm going to do a quick couple of things. Could you turn your phones off please? First thing, we're going to do an intro for the candidates. The candidates that have turned up tonight will each get a 3-minute opening statement. We'll then have written questions, and then oral questions as well, followed by a 3-minute closing statement from both of the candidates. If you would prefer to do a written question rather than a spoken question, please, Lorna, where are you? Ask Lorna for a bit of paper and a pen, and she'll sort you out. So, we have done our level best to get every candidate, every party to be represented. Sadly, we haven't been able to do that. The Labour candidate has a prior engagement in another constituency, apparently. The Tories candidate couldn't get anyone to come, and...
Excuse me, in another constituency?
Yeah? And the Lib Dems couldn't get anyone to come and speak either, so apologies for that. We have done it very, very best to get everyone to come along. So, we tossed the coin, and first to go is Scott Rutherford of the Green Party, followed by Neil Hanvey of the Scottish National Party. Scott.
Well, thanks for coming, everyone. Good turnout, and thanks for having me. So my name is Scott Rutherford. I'm the Scottish Green Party candidate for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. I was born here. I was born in Temple Hall. I've lived here. I've worked in the constituency. I've been a student here. I've been unemployed here. So I feel like I have a good grasp of the issues that matter most to local people. I've certainly experienced the brunt of some of the worst issues. Before I came along here, I was at a vigil outside Holyrood for the International Trans Day of Remembrance, remembering thousands of people every year who are harassed, who are bullied, who are killed in other countries. And I just want to say, on this day, my thoughts are absolutely with people in the trans community. I think it's disgusting that people are made to feel small and unwelcome in their own country. I think a future independent Scotland has the potential to be a beacon of hope, progressive hope, for so many people, including the trans community. That's my great wish, and I think so many in our movement believe that. Thank you. Now is the day to say it. Yeah. That's just one of the events, many which I've been invited along to. Obviously, I can't attend everything, but I'm glad I didn't make it late today. So the Scottish Green Party, the Scottish Green Party are pro-independence, pro-European party. We believe in giving people a second referendum on Brexit and on Scottish independence. I think clearly there's a democratic deficit at play in this nation. What we need is more democracy, we don't need less, and Boris Johnson is not one to tell us what we can and can't have. On that, I think those things really matter. They're big picture. They're certainly, you'll hear it every single doorstep if you knock on one in this election, but there's loads of local election, loads of local issues which matter just as much to local people. And we shouldn't trivialise that. So, you know, people's employment, affordability of housing, this all matters. Personally, the issues we've really championed in this election are a future for BIFAB, which means a future for an area that used to be formerly industrial, used to be a Labour heartland fight, because it offers people stability in their careers, stability in their homes, stability in their family life, because they had that job, whether that was down the mines, whether that was linoleum, whatever. That's gone now, right? But industry isn't dead in Scotland, it needn't die. And when we make that great transition to a zero carbon economy, we need to make sure that places like Kirkcaldy are not left behind again. We did not plan for the end of coal. Look what happened throughout the 80s. It decimated this country, decimated this constituency. The same will happen if we do not plan for the end of oil. 2045 is far too late a date. We have 11 years. 11 years. That's the end of the next Westminster Parliament. You want me to hurry up? No? All right. That's the end of it. Is it? Sorry. Well, I'll just wrap it up. That's some of the things we stand for. Plenty more. By voting for me, you can demand climate action and a Green New Deal. And I feel if me and Neil do better than those two clowns last night, even though I've got a sore throat, it's cold, then I think, you're in for a bit of a treat. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you for that, Scott. I've just forgotten, actually, that just for the sake of balance, I didn't mention that the Brexit Party couldn't send someone along either. The reason that I didn't give a name is apparently the guy's using a nickname or something like that. That's his name. Aye, go on. Clear later.
If you check today's Friday's Daily Record, these pictures of his Nazi helmet and armband on. So that kind of sums up.
Thanks for that. Right, so our next speaker is going to be Neil Hanvey of the Scottish National Party.
Thanks very much everyone for coming along. My name is Neil Hanvey and I'm the candidate for the SNP. I'd like to just echo Scott's comments regarding the trans community and making sure that we find a way forward in the current maelstrom of debate, which is largely unhelpful, but it doesn't diminish the importance of a society that is based on respect and equality. In this campaign, I'm just going to focus on my experience at the doorstep, and some of the candidates who are not here tonight have made the point that this campaign is really not about Brexit, and it's not really a relevant issue. In fact, they're canvassing train stations talking about reserved matters, or devolved matters rather than reserved matters. So I think the reality is that Brexit is foremost in people's mind. They don't really want to talk about it, but they know that we have to deal with it. So that is an important issue. In 2014, we were persuaded, the people of Scotland were persuaded to vote for a status quo that no longer exists. And we were given a shopping list of promises of the improvements that would be made to Scotland, about a respect agenda, that we were a partnership of equals, and that has proven to be completely false. In fact, we didn't have to wait until much longer after the vote was declared. The next morning, I was going to say Gordon Brown, but David Cameron, same difference. David Cameron made the announcement that his priority was English votes for English laws. And that was really, the last kick in the teeth that anybody needed on that morning after the referendum result. The vow and the respect agenda has been completely dismantled, and the Brexit debate has proven that beyond any doubt. Scotland is in the position where we voted 62% to remain, yet we've been ignored, we've been mocked, and we've been ridiculed in the chamber. And that's largely been because of our fallen MPs in 2017, and it really reinforces the need for us to give a very strong message to Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn, which one of these two people ends up being the Prime Minister. And if you reflect on, I didn't watch the debate last night, but I've seen some clips because I just thought that is a debate for another country. That's not a debate for my country. And the comments that they made about Scotland, about Nicola Sturgeon, and the ITV decision to exclude Scotland from that discussion was absolutely shameful, but actually it's really important that that continues to happen, because we need to know that that's how they view Scotland. So this election is about making our voice heard, giving Westminster a signal, securing the indie ref that we need next year, and winning it.
Okay, thanks for that, Neil. So does anyone want to take advantage of a piece of paper and a pen to do a written question? Okay, so I'm going to take 2 questions each round, if you like, and let each candidate answer them. So who would like to go first? Adela.
I'd like to direct this question probably at yourself.
I'd like to know what you actually think of tactical voting and how you think that this should probably apply, especially in this election when we want Scotland to be yellow, basically, to give them this word that we want independence and we want independence now. What is your views on tactical voting?
Thanks, Adela. We're going to take a second question as well. We're going to put it to both candidates. Anyone else want to speak right now? Okay, go for it.
On the same theme, while you're both here and you're the only two that have turned up, Scott, I'm guessing you're going to steal some votes from Neil, especially in the Cowdenbeath constituency, but due to the most modern issues that are happening up there at the moment. I don't know if that's carrying through to Kirkcaldy or not. And I'm thinking along those same lines, if Scotland's goal is to achieve independence, Neil, you might lose here if Scott steals enough votes from you, and then I'm guessing Leslie Lair's going to sail through based on the dilution of the vote. I'm just saying it as I see it. What do you both think of it?
Right, okay, so that's two good questions to start with. Right, do you want to answer them?
I'm happy. Should we do question one first? Yeah, tactical voting. I think people should vote for what they believe in and choose a representative that they think will serve their constituency best. I think the SNP had a 10,000 majority in this seat in 2015 because they articulated a clear anti-austerity, pro-independence view. They connected with people, they had a good ground game. In 2017, they ran, let's be fair, a pretty shit campaign. No one knew what they stood for. I think that's not going to happen this time. If you look at polls, I think this will be the first seat the SNP tick off the night. It's the third most at risk, I think, for Labour. It'll be an easy take. I think the IPCC report gives us 10 years to come to a net zero carbon economy, and no other party, no other candidate in this constituency is putting that forward, and I find that unbelievable. We're in the midst of a climate emergency, right? If Scotland goes independent, that's great. It means we can address that so much easier as a left-wing country. But the fact is, Westminster doesn't have to give us another referendum. And I want Greens to be winning seats across Scotland. I want us to win seats up and down the country. So I'm not waiting for that possible independence referendum, which isn't even guaranteed that we'd win. I'm engaging with what's in front of us now, and ultimately the candidate people want the most will win.
Yeah, thanks. First comments really on the tactical voting. I think there was a bit of an outbreak of frustration mixed with a little bit of hysteria about how dare the Greens stand a candidate in seats that are marginal for the SNP. That's not fair. We should all be working together for independence. And I understand that, but I think you step back from that a second and say, well, actually, that's a bit presumptuous, first of all. Every political party has an absolute right to field candidates wherever they want. And I took a much more pragmatic approach to that, and I was contacted by Green Party members who are supportive of the SNP in elections where they feel that's the best vote. And I said to them, you know, you have to vote with your conscience. This is, you know, I've always respected that. I've never felt that people waste their vote when they vote for what they passionately believe in. And I think taking that approach was a much kinder and respectful way to win people over to vote for me, because that's the message that they give to me. You know, I've got a lot of respect for Scott. I've been in other elections with Scott as well, and I have, you know, significant sympathy with the Green Party agenda. But not that that's not important, because I think environmental issues are really important to the SNP, and I think the fact that we've got the world's most ambitious climate change targets in response to the climate emergency says a lot about the current SNP government. So, you know, I'm not saying that we are doing everything, and I don't think maybe we'd be as radical as the Greens, but, you know, the reality is that if people want to prioritise the issues in certain elections, then that's a decision for that person, and I certainly wouldn't attack Scott for standing. I don't feel any rancour with him. The risk in terms of whether that would impact on the SNP campaign, well, that, as they say, is politics. You know, I have to convince electors to vote for me. I think I've taken the right approach by trying to win their trust over rather than start attacking Scott for standing. I don't think that's the right way to approach it. With regard to I think Scott mentioned Mossmoran and a couple of other things I just wanted to maybe comment on, which was, you know, that the Mossmoran issue is not something that can be dismissed. You know, the issues that people are raising have to be taken seriously. And my analysis of that and looking at the assessment that the NHS Fife made on the health implications is that it has been taken as seriously as it can be. There are a couple of caveats in that. First of all, one of the key things that stood out for me in that was that when they did the literature review looking for evidence, literature doesn't exist for cracker plan emissions. So there's not really anything for them to hang their hat on. So that's something that perhaps needs to be addressed. So there are lessons from that. And I saw a post on Facebook the other day about nitrogen contamination in the area and why air quality monitoring isn't as robust for Mossmoran as it is perhaps for other areas. I think it's a really good question as well. But at the end of the day, and where we are now, is we've got a position where we have an industry where we employ many people in reasonably well-paid jobs. They support the local economy with the money that they spend, and what we have to do is have one eye on where we are now and one eye on the future. And there's a mixture of things that can be done there. First and foremost, most important thing is how do we deal with hydrocarbons and what can we do to capture and store as much of that carbon as possible. That's absolutely crucial, and that's a conversation that I've had with the Exxon team at Mossmoran recently. The other thing is, what other renewable type green products could be taken, extracted as part of that process? One of the things that they currently extract but use in-house and don't use it for commercial purposes is hydrogen. Now that's, you know, if we can capture the carbon and we can take off hydrogen for hydrogen fuel cell, that's pretty green, and that's a good offset against any carbon footprint. So there's a balance of that to be done there. But the bottom line is, if we want to move to electric vehicles, we need plastic. And until we come up with a better solution for that kind of plastic, we're kind of sort of still reliant on hydrocarbons. So I'm going on about this a bit too long and I will wrap up now. But the key thing is that we passed a motion at the SNP conference recently which was to move away from single-use plastics by 2025. And I made the point at that time that we need a game plan that invests in compostable or biodegradable plastic alternatives while we move away, because that's, you know, I hate going to the bin and filling it up with plastic that had no real purpose. I could go on about other things, but I'm sure we'll pick them up. But I just kind of got into my stride there.
Yeah, so it's kind of a lot to digest there. I'll kind of park the issues with single-use plastics to the side maybe for now. I sort of dislike the characterisation that I'm stealing votes from Neil. Like, maximum respect to Neil. He doesn't take this for granted, and no good candidate should. I'm not stealing votes from anyone. I'm winning votes for myself if people vote for me. And I'll just add, Cowdenbeath's a Labour stronghold. I think if you're taking votes off the average person in Cowdenbeath, you're more likely to be a Labour supporter than they are SNP. And sure, maybe more of those will break to the SNP this time, but I feel they're a pretty fluid voting group that I have a lot to say to, and if they believe in my vision and a green vision for Scotland, then, you know, all the more to them. Why shouldn't they vote for me? So our plans with Mossmoran is that basically it needs to be decommissioned gradually or reach net zero emissions by some point in the next decade and a half. I think neither of those are actually going to happen. People tend to assume Mossmoran's produces energy. It doesn't. It's a petrochemicals plant, and Neil's right, it does partially involve plastics. I don't want to get into too much of the detail about it. It's an ethylene cracker, ethylene juice used in the creation of single-use plastics, right? This world can't afford single-use plastics. It's not something that we have to. It's not something that we have to use in our everyday lives if alternatives are created. And governments can create alternatives. They can create alternative markets for these sort of single-use bags, for example. People feel left behind on Moss Modern. They don't feel listened to. And I think by raising the issue, giving it the public profile it deserves that we have, I think it's the most respectful thing to do in the world. If people think that we should just ignore them, well, I sort of think you should question your own ideals. I'll just add, I don't want to see people lose jobs. You know, the whole point of a just transition to a net zero carbon economy is that we take everyone with us. We don't see what happened in the 80s happening again. I don't want to see people with good skills and good jobs and good earnings default on mortgages. But at some point in the next couple of decades, that is going to crash. The investment that's in fossil fuel companies and industries is going to crash. We need to divest urgently. That's where the capital can come from for green industries. Before we see that massive crash. And, you know, I don't want to see people in the dole like they were in the 80s. That's what I have to say on Moss Modern.
Thanks for that, Scott. I've got a written question from the floor here. This one is addressed to Scott as well. The Greens did not stand at the last election. You thus start with a blank sheet of paper. Who do you reckon is going to vote for you in terms of their previous affiliations?
Cheers. Yeah, we didn't stand at the last one, much to my chagrin. Who do I think we're likely to take our support from? I think if you look at the turnout for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath in 2017 as opposed to 2015, in 2017 I think it was about 8 or 10% lower, which means you've got a kind of skewed demographic in that election essentially. It was a rainy day, a lot of postal votes went in. When you see a higher percentage of turnout like we did in 2015, where I think it was about 60, 65 plus, you have a more rounded view of how the electorate in Kirkcaldy actually thinks. Clearly, a lot of those electorate are pro-independence and anti-austerity. To characterise any more than that, I can't really say. We've never stood here before. But I think the Labour voting bloc is very fluid right now. It's very winnable for all parties. I don't expect you to be as much of a data geek as myself, but there was 3 by-elections, 3 council by-elections in Scotland last week. One in Inverness Central, one in Dunfermline Central, and one in the South. Now, in each of those elections, every other party benefited, apart from Labour. A chunk of that went to the SNP. The Tories marginally increased their votes or held similar. Most of it went to the Lib Dems. Some of it went to us. We doubled our vote in Inverness Central, and it raised by a modest amount in Dunfermline on the side. So clearly, I think that appetite for your left-leaning voter who's traditionally voted Labour all his life, I think they're fair game to anyone. I don't think Leslie Laird is the champion they want for their constituency, and I hope we take a good chunk of them. I'm sure all the other parties, particularly the Lib Dems and the SNP, will as well.
Thank you, Scott. Any other questions from the floor? This is going to be a short night if we don't get any more questions. Yeah, go.
Yeah, just, I mean, I think we're, you know, the whole political situation nationally is in such a state of flux, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. I think some of Scott's observations were spot on, particularly about Labour voters. I mean, it's quite astounding. When I joined the SNP and started campaigning after I moved back up to Scotland in 2010, it was quite hard to find an SNP voter. Now it's nigh on impossible to find a Labour voter. It really is quite extraordinary, and so many. I mean, we were up in Benarty a couple of weeks ago, and I had people who had voted Labour all their life who are now voting SNP because they are so disillusioned, not necessarily with, well, a lot of them don't know who their MP is, so that's probably an issue, But it's the whole pantomime of Westminster has completely distorted politics, and that ITV debate was just another extension of that. And I hope that we find in some time that the Greens and the SNP are the two parties that have to slug it out, although as someone who's on clearly the left wing of the SNP, you know, I feel very comfortable with the Green Party. I know they push things in Parliament, and you know that's what happens when you've got a supply and confidence arrangement, or you know you need that support. So, but the fact that Labour were in 6th place in Inverness, 6th place behind the Greens, just tells you a really interesting story. The other point that I'd make is and I'll stop there. Is in 2017, the SNP vote only went down a little bit. It didn't really collapse or anything. What happened was 10,000 people didn't come out in the rain to vote. So those votes didn't go anywhere else. They didn't abandon us. So it's our responsibility, my responsibility, to make sure that we convince voters in the area to get out and vote on the 12th of December.
Okay, we have a written question again. This one reads, are either of the candidates familiar with Our Common Home? This is a Commonweal project, which is a fully costed, comprehensive Green New Deal for Scotland.
I'm not familiar with that. I'm aware that the Commonwealth published a Green New Deal paper about a fortnight or a month ago, but no, not that particular issue, sorry.
I'm glad you said that first. I'm not aware of that specific report, but I'd be very interested. I think a lot of the stuff that the Commonweal have put out since IndieRef has been really interesting. I think Robin's got a great mind. I think some things are perhaps seem overambitious, and people maybe feel that they're not realistic. But maybe if we were independent, it wouldn't feel that way, because actually we'd know that we were able to take the action that's necessary. I think that's the bit that stops people from taking the leap that's required.
Thank you, Neil. Questions, anyone? Alan?
Hi. During the last Parliament, our independent supporting MPs were treated with utter contempt in the House of Commons much of the time. And it appeared to many people that our MPs sat there and tutted and shook their heads and said in interviews, isn't this terrible the way we're being treated? And that was about it. It carried on throughout that whole Parliament. Should our independent supporting MPs in the next Parliament continue to act that way, or should they use every means possible to express their determination to disrupt parliamentary business and to make clear that they should not be being treated in that manner?
I'll start off with a wee story. So, I used to question Angus Robertson every time he spoke about why don't we challenge the media for the way that they report stories and perhaps distort certain information. And he always said, you win that argument on the doorstep. And whilst I do agree that the argument can be won on the doorstep, there's also a need to challenge the narrative more generally. I understand everyone's frustration, and I've spent many times shouting at the telly. But whilst the concerns are very valid for the last session, John Bercow was a reasonably fair speaker. This time, that's not going to be the case, because the new Mr. Speaker has made it abundantly clear that he is prepared to be incredibly hostile to the SNP. And so I guess the response to your question depends on the result. You know, we need to have a convincing win for us to be taken seriously, particularly on the independence question. And then we need to respond to whatever message comes out of the new constitution of the Parliament about our key question on independence. So it's difficult to answer because the dynamic has changed so much. But I am absolutely happy to be as forceful in my response to any hostility as I need to be to draw attention to the issue. Obviously, I'll do as I'm told by the whips to a certain extent, but sometimes it might just get the better of me, you never know. But no, I understand. I mean, it's disgraceful the way that some MPs are allowed to behave, and it's tolerated, and it's seen acceptable to be dismissive, rude, arrogant to Scottish members. It's disgraceful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Neil's made some very fair points. I don't think anyone here, or just the public in general, would think it particularly biased to say that SNP MPs are routinely dismissed and disrespected. To ask one of the members from Glasgow to repeatedly say what he was saying, it was just an embarrassing ploy from some Tory backbencher to see the seats of the Tory benches empty whenever Ian Blackford stand up to speak. Shows a clear disrespect, and I don't think that's going to change. That's a cultural thing, and that's to do with English nationalism engulfing England. With all respect to the SNP MPs, I think they're better being dignified and taking the high road. I think they've done that quite well. The left in general is ignored, is routinely disrespected in England. And hopefully that's something that, over the next 5 years, we can manage to walk away from. But who knows? Ultimately, an independent Scotland will set a completely different tone. And I think Holyrood does. I think Holyrood, partially to do with the chamber design, we're not shouting others down, we're not leaving the chamber halfway or at the start of speeches. It's a lot more respectful, and I commend every party for that in Scotland. We're setting the tone, we're leading the way, and I think that's how Scotland, I think that's how the Parliament can convince people that we'll act in an independent Scotland, that we take people seriously. We can have disagreements, but there's respect, and everyone's voice is welcomed.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, gentleman at the back there.
This is a question to both candidates. You both briefly touched upon Mossmore and your thoughts on the long-term viability of the plant and operations for the economy and local jobs. However, there's been over 350 public reports of social and health attacks made to the Mossmore Action Group by residents across this ward, and over 900 complaints to CPAP from a single flaring event. If elected, what actions and commitments will you undertake to support residents in getting redress from the impacts of the Mossmore operations in the short and medium term?
Thank you for that. Sorry, what was your name?
James Clift.
Hi James, I recognise you from your numerous posts in the group. Thanks for your work. Thank you for being so proactive in bringing together views from all across the political aisle and putting it to people so that they're aware of what their politicians are saying. I think that's a very hard job, so you should be commended for that work you do. On Mossmore, ultimately, unless it can go net carbon and completely transform its activities so that it's not spewing out, I think there's a dangerous amount of nitrous that's put into the air as well. Ultimately, people are really weighed down with negative health impacts around there. We can't just abandon workers there. I'm for any kind of worker, I'm just not for any kind of industry. We need a just transition so that they can put those skills into equally or better paying long-term jobs. Where they are now is not long-term. We are not going to need ethylene and single-use plastics going into the next 10 and 20 years. It's a tale as old as time itself. It's a monolithic business that can do what it wants. and local people who are powerless. And that's sort of why I got involved in politics, because that just exists all across the globe. And the Green Movement in particular has that kind of rebellious streak in it that just says, no, why the fuck should petrochemical companies just get to do whatever they want and everyone else suffers? Like, we're all in this together. It's everyone's there. So it has to go, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I mean, what Scott said is exactly kind of similar to the points that I've made. I think the whole discussion about Mossmoran has become very hot, and it's quite difficult to be calm in that situation, you know, because people, their experience is that this is having a terrible impact on their lives, and so nobody can dismiss that. That's a clear message, and I've got friends who live in Kelty who you would think, well, that's quite far away from the plant, but because of, I think, the geography and the geology, they get the transmission of vibrations and they see the light and it upsets the children. And that certainly was one of the key findings of the NHS report, was that the light and noise pollution was a big issue. And it's not just ExxonMobil that flare, because they've got that tall flare, but you'll have seen that while that part of the plant is closed down at the moment for the new equipment to be installed, we've still got orange skies. And that's because the plant next to it that deals with the butane and other gases, the Shell plant, continues to ground flare. And the reason they're using so much gas to ground flare is because they can't feed it into the cracker to be processed there. So while the cracker's getting repaired, the flaring is actually coming from next door. In terms of, you know, Scott's right, this is kind of my view. I've found it very bewildering, this debate where we have people who are aligned with the Conservative Party taking what I consider to be an anti-business approach, which is shut it down now. And we've got people who in the Labour Party are also saying the same thing, and I just can't kind of square that in terms of the political situation, because jobs are really important. People's livelihoods are really important, and you know, if we had shut down all the coal mines because they were dangerous, they would have been shut down long before Margaret Thatcher came along with her ideological trashing of the Fife economy. But we have to have a smooth transition from where we are now. We have to take as much action as possible. I've raised this with Exxon when I met with them, and I'll do it with Shell when I meet them next week, is that they must start taking real action on controlling their emissions, and doing better monitoring, and moving towards more renewable sources in the future. But we've got a responsibility in Scotland to develop technologies that produce the kind of plastic alternatives that we've spoken about earlier. There is no biodegradable product made in Scotland, but we've got some of the best resources for doing that. So fish skin is a really good one, seaweed is another one, potato starch. All of these things can be manufactured into plastic alternatives for single use, and they're all biodegradable. But we don't have that industry in Scotland, so it's a real opportunity to do something proactive in this country, to move the scientists from petrochemicals across the renewables industry.
Yeah, well, I was glad to see the publishing of the NHS report, because now people can't be dismissed as easily. It's not a matter of saying, oh, it's psychosomatic. It's getting into winter time, you just got a cold. Like, clearly now there is the beginning of a body of literature that shows the plant has adverse health impacts. Now, the same issues happen all across the world. When the people of Flint, Michigan were told, no, you're fine, the water's fine. When fracking has invaded water sources all across the US, they were told, no, you're fine, don't be ridiculous. You look at those areas now, they're decimated in investment, right? And that's because you allowed the free market to run riot. There is no economy that works for everyone unless you regulate these things. And Mossbourne is allowed to run right. It's the Wild West of ethylene crackers. And it looks like it potentially might be doing so over Christmas. I sincerely hope that's not the case. My colleague Mark Ruskell, who's a Scottish Green Party MSP for Fife and Mid Scotland, is chasing this up in Parliament, and we sincerely hope that's not the case. But if people want to see it stopped, if they want to demand climate action, vote Green. It is the way these issues are heard. It's the only way these things have risen to the top of agendas. It's because people have voted Green. They've said no more. I want change.
I don't disagree with Scott. All I would say is that the SNP have developed the world's most ambitious climate targets, and you know, and Paul Wheelhouse has been speaking to both plant operators about how they can improve their carbon capture. So, you know, I understand where Scott's coming from. I don't disagree with him at all. But at the moment, I think we're punching above our weight, certainly internationally.
Thank you, Neil. Right, another couple of questions from the floor. I'll take Rosemary and then I'll take Leslie. Do you want to take the question each, and then we'll get the candidates to answer them in turn?
Thank you. Sorry, I'll just speak up. This is a slightly different question in regard to NHS. We know that Donald Trump had initially said that our NHS was on the table. That was then dismissed by Boris Johnson. It was not on the table. However, recently we actually now have serious suspicions that in actual fact it probably is, in terms of selling off the NHS chain of supply down south. So what my question is in regard to the fact that that may be happening down south, how is that going to impact on us? Yes, we have a devolved NHS up here, but how is that going to impact, or will it impact on our chain of supply, on our chain of equipment, on our medications that come up from down south, and what can we do and what can you, yourselves as candidates, do to safeguard that in actual fact we don't take the brunt of what may be sold off down south?
Thanks for that, Leslie. Rosemary.
My question's kind of similar. How would you protect Scotland's interests in terms of jobs and services, especially NHS, in light of Johnson's deal or even a no-deal Brexit? And are you concerned that along the way Scotland, the brand, will be negotiated away as well?
It's a fair point you make about Scotland, the brand. I don't think anyone here wants to live in a little America. It's everyone's NHS. We fought so hard for that. The working class of these islands have, for hundreds of years, broken their backs and had their backs broken by their jobs. And the NHS was that gleaming light in 1945 that introduced a bit of equality finally into the British system. And over my dead body will that ever happen in Scotland. You're right to point out that it is devolved, but the NHS operates across the whole of the UK, and you're right, if there's supply chains that involve international travel medicines, whether that's inter-EU travel or outer-EU travel from the US, from other countries, I think there's every chance Boris Johnson will allow Scotland to be sold off like that. And if there's a particularly harsh break and enforced trade barriers, it's going to negatively impact us all. Luckily, NHS in Scotland prescriptions are free. People down in England, I imagine, if they see their prices spike, they're going to be wholly disgusted in enforcing through this Tory government, which promises to solve all their ills. I have really serious worries about Boris Johnson. He's willing to say one thing one day and compromise on it the next with Donald Trump. It worries me a lot. I think Scotland, in an independent EU, manages to negate these problems, and the sooner we have that, the sooner we're better. The sooner we're better off.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Can I just say, I listen
Thanks, Rosemary, for the question. Well, I mean, I know that some people here will know, but the NHS has been a massive part of my life. It's something that, you know, I joined the NHS when I was 19 and worked there until I retired. But the NHS is so much a part of all of our lives. We are not complacent about it, but we kind of take it for granted that it's always going to be there. And there's, I think, little doubt now, because if Boris Johnson has said something provocative, you can pretty much guarantee that's what he's going to go for, because he is so untrustworthy. The only times that you really get a sense of who the man is when he lets his guard down. And in the final few days of the Parliament, when he was all pumped up at PMQ and he thought he'd get a good old ruse in at the Nats across the way, he said that he was prepared to take control of the Scottish NHS. And that should frighten everyone, because the NHS in Scotland is the best performing NHS anywhere in the UK. It's not perfect, never has been, possibly never will be. But it's certainly miles ahead of the NHS down south now. I spent a lot of my career working in cancer care down in London, and friends of mine who work in the NHS down there are absolutely on their knees. They've got underinvestment, they're losing staff from the EU, they're losing staff from countries where the person's ethnicity is perhaps obvious because of their skin colour, and the levels of abuse and xenophobia that, not just on the streets but in hospital wards, is just pushing so many people out of the service, and it's become a really hostile environment. So, you know, the NHS is a big deal. Any cuts to the NHS, so I think one of the points you asked about, Rosemary, was what happens if they cut the amount of money they invest in the NHS down south. Would that affect us? Well, it would, because Barnett consequentials are used to calculate the money that we get for those kind of services. So if they start hiving off or closing services down south, then that will have a negative impact on our funding if we are reliant on the block grant. But what's most worrying is if Boris Johnson sees through his threat and starts to undermine the devolution settlement by taking over a large swathe of our policy, or I don't think it's beyond comprehension that he would close our Parliament. I don't think that that's, you know, being hysterical in any way. It's quite a possible scenario. But I guess the key issue is it will have a massive impact. Leslie's question, we're moving on to that? Yeah. So Leslie's question was about how do we protect Scotland from the impact of Brexit. So there's a reasonable list of things there. And let's be clear. Brexit is not about independence for the UK. It's not what it's about. It's about lining the pockets of capitalists and disinvesting and selling off public services. That is what it's about. It's about making sure that the lowest tax can be applied to the richest people, and that the people who pay for it are the ones who can least afford it. That's what Brexit is all about, and people have been completely duped to believe that it's some noble cause. And the impact that that will have on Scotland if it went ahead and we weren't able to defend ourselves is that we would see something like 80 to 100,000 jobs would go almost overnight, that workers' rights and the things that we take for granted, like a number of paid holidays we get a year, public holidays, those kind of things, would be open season on them. Environmental protection, so people who are worried about Mossmoran, if you think Brexit's going to make that better, it's not. It's going to make it much, much worse. Food, you'll be allowed to sell chlorinated chicken, beef that's full of antibiotics and hormones. Health and safety legislation would be rolled back, make the whole environment more risky. And there is, for both of those things, there is only one solution. One other thing I want to pick up is Scotland, the brand. So we already know that they want to start selling Scotch whisky as British whisky. That they are not going to keep any of the geographic protections over our world-class food and drink industry. That they would allow Scotch whisky, if they even kept the name, to be made in America or Japan. That protection, that means we're one of I think it's over 20% of all of the food and drink exports from the UK is Scotch whisky. It would decimate that industry in Scotland. And there is only one solution, and that's to secure an independence referendum next year and vote yes. That's the only way. That's the only choice.
So we've got one question, and then I'll take Sandy's role. Take three this time. And could you give your name before you speak, please?
Hello. Hi, Stuart Duffy. I've got a question just about debt. It seems to be the one issue that's not been talked about during the debates, and not looking at the manifestos before they're produced. I wanted to ask the candidates how, I've just checked the latest figures, the UK's national debt will be almost £2 trillion by the end of this year. Both candidates that have the respect for their constituents and have turned up tonight are pro-independence. So if we were to take roughly 10% of that national debt, that would equate to almost 85% of our GDP. How do we get rid of that? And how do we get rid of that huge burden from our children and our grandchildren's necks?
I'm interested in your views on the kind of Trump tactics that are being used by the Conservatives, where they tell a huge lie and their core support to believe that, and it doesn't matter if there's apologies or denials or anything else, they continue to believe what they first heard, which was a lie. And I'm wondering if there's any sophistication in both the Greens and the SNP, because they're the ones that have turned up tonight, in combating that, because I think that it's pernicious, and I think that people who should not ever have been voting Tory, whose lives have been destroyed not by the EU, but who seem to believe that their lives have been destroyed by the EU, are continuing to believe that rubbish. And it doesn't matter how often you see it on the telly, they're in pubs in what are working class areas, and folk are saying, we must get out of the EU. It's absolutely, to me it's bizarre, but what I'm wondering is, are you countering that? It's easy in a place like this, I think everybody in here's probably like-minded, but how do you get that message out?
Sandra, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's a wee bit different, this question, maybe it's for Neil, and maybe Scott has an opinion on it. But a criticism sometimes levelled at the SNP is that they no longer link with the grass movement like they did in 2014, when you had Commonweal, when you had Rook, when you had Bella Caledonia, that had a massive effect on the voting then. And some might say your dislocation from that may have caused some problems for you at the snap election. I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that a lot of people will say to me that they feel the SNP have dislocated somehow from the grass movement that was YES.
Okay, so the first question was on debt. Second question on, well, basically lying, fake news, I suppose, and SNP in the grassroots. So who would like to just do one question?
Yes, the first question about debt. It's a fair point you make about the debt burden of an independent Scotland would have to take when it ceased to be part of the UK. As much as we're due a share of assets, presumably we're also due a share of that debt, and as far as I'm aware, that's negotiable. But that's a very technical aspect of law that I don't really care to make an arse of myself about. When it comes to debt in general, household debt is at record highs. And when we're in an era of employment, that's about 98%, well, unemployment's less than 2%, I should say. People should be thriving. Wages should be higher and rising, and yet we've seen this inversion in employment. People are in poverty in work. And when has that ever existed? It's never existed in my lifetime, anyway, until now. I think it's such an important issue, and when it comes to Westminster, it's something we can actually act upon. Wages should be a living wage. They should be indexed to a living wage and related to inflation, so that politicians cannot kick this about. An economy is no good if you're obsessed with GDP, and normal people, young people like me, cannot get on the housing ladder. It's a disgrace, and ultimately when young people like me put off those large capital investments in housing, in cars, whatever else it will be, there's less VAT for the government to cream off. So that on debt. When it comes to national debt, I think England's is about 90-something% of its GDP. Boris's plans to potentially cut corporation tax are going to exacerbate that. His plans to borrow more are going to exacerbate that. I think governments don't have to run surpluses. Sometimes it's a disastrous decision to do so. Run a deficit if it means ordinary people do not see their pockets become thinner and thinner. I'll just add, a government can run debt, it can run a deficit every year. The UK economy has run a surplus, I think, once since 2000. So long as ordinary people aren't in the burden, it doesn't matter. The interest you pay in that debt is problematic. If you're linked to a currency that you don't have control over, i.e. you forfeit the right of the central bank, such as the Eurozone nations have, then that is out with your control, which is why an independent Scotland, or a potentially independent Scotland, needs to retain its own currency so that we can control that level of debt, that level of deficit, and we can fund infrastructure projects by posting bonds. Yeah, that's it. I think I'll go on enough.
Thanks, Stuart. It's a good question. It's a tough question, but there is a reasonable answer to it. And whilst we do have a responsibility to service debts that have been undertaken on our behalf, we also have the opportunity to negotiate how that is repaid and what is offset against that. So if you look at the investment in major capital projects that were funded from Scottish oil revenues, so you look at Channel Tunnel, Crossrail, various other big projects that have predominantly been concentrated in London and the South East, you can start to get to a negotiating position where actually you say, well, that was your investment, so we need some credit back for that. The other thing is that the assets that are held on our behalf are not just, buildings and things down south. They are international assets that the UK has accrued over the years, embassies across the world that we would be entitled to some share of. And most importantly, in the Bank of England, Scotland has significant deposits. We have to do that because that's how we fund our own printed currency. So there are a significant amount of assets there. With regard to how we service debt going forward, as I think Scott said, every country has a debt that they service, and what you need to do is to have a plan for that. We have, over the last 50, or not 50 years, nearly 50 years, since 76, had oil being extracted from the North Sea, and if you compare the Oil Wealth Fund in the UK, which is zero, to the Oil Wealth Fund in Norway, who have slightly less oil than us, which is £1 trillion, you can see that there's been a significant amount of money that's not benefited Scotland. So there's an argument for an offset in that regard as well. But I I think the most important thing about that debt is that we all are led to assume and to accept that that debt is somehow our debt, that we've incurred that. When the reality is, if you look at the way that transnational corporations are dealt with in this country, they often pay less tax than medium to large sized businesses. And that's one of the biggest issues that needs to be faced. Because what austerity did was take money out of a tiny little pot and made lots of people suffer. But what they never wanted to do was to redress the situation with corporate banks and to make sure that they paid for the bank bailout. And it really was a heist, you know, it was a slick heist. And you just have to wonder who's pulling the strings there. I'm a big fan of Naomi Klein, who's a Canadian activist and writer. She's and a journalist. She's an absolutely amazing woman. She's been involved in a thing called the LEAP project in Canada. And it's one of the things that they want to challenge is that corporate responsibility from the corporations and to make them pay their share, because at the moment you look at how Brexit's affected or austerity's affected everybody in the UK. Everybody's had wages freezed, you know, short-term contracts, 0 hours contracts, all these terrible things, people in poverty having their benefits cut, bedroom tax, disabled people losing their cars, stopping work. I mean, it's horrific. But the rich have put on billions of pounds, and that just is obscene. So, you know, I think as an independent country, that would be something that I think in our nature we sense that that's wrong, and that's something that we would be able to take control of.
Okay, the next one on the big line.
Yeah, I think it's unsurprising that Boris has sort of fallen into the traps of populism. He stands by nothing. He's flip-flopped on major issues all his political life. He's the charm of a sponge, so he might as well try and be as devilish as he can. Dominic Cummings is really the driving force behind the Tories' tactical campaign. What he did in 2016 was tantamount to selling the country out. The bigger the lie you throw, the harder it is to disprove. And I think when it came to Remain, and this is true of the 2014 independence referendum as well, when it comes to addressing negativity, when it comes to addressing lies, we talk ourselves round in circles a bit. No, that number's not quite true, and we get caught up in the trap of saying, well, you know, there's a partial truth to it, this is really what's going on. Ultimately, we need to get out. When it comes to the next independence referendum, to avoid this, we need to get out there early. We need to have documents similar to the Growth Commission, Green New Deal documents that show that our economic plans for Scotland, our plans for society, are beyond reproach. You need to control that narrative. And ultimately, I think people are more attracted to positive messages that will benefit everyone than they are to demonising whatever group of the day it is this time, at least in Scotland anyway, I'd like to think. Fiona, you raised a really good point about Tories getting away with lies. I mean, the fact they changed their Twitter handle last night to Fact Check UK, I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a joke when I seen it this morning. That's unbelievable. The
and they've got a tagline to justify it.
Yeah.
Every news programme all over and will be in every pub where the folk are saying,
It's unbelievable. Yeah, it's unbelievable. But yeah, and that sort of negative narrative, I just don't think will fly in Scotland. Not now, not in the long term. When it comes to being punitive on what are demonstrable lies, mistruths, there's a bill in the Scottish Parliament that goes to stage 2 within the next week. It's called the referendums bill. Basically, it sets out a framework for how all future referendums will be processed, which largely means it's out of the Scottish Government's hands. It's going to be processed the same way every time, the same time frame. Questions that are set for referendums may have a shelf life of 10 years, i.e., yes, no. The Electoral Commission seem really fair on this. What they want to introduce, potentially through amendments, is to make punishments go by trial. Should people who are known as active campaigners for various organisations and political parties, to make them go to trial by jury, which has not been the case in the past. So I certainly think if there's the will of the Scottish Parliament, well, i.e. the SNP and the Greens, then that can go ahead and we might be able to clamp down on some of those lies and mistruths in the next independence referendum. It's never going to be rosy. The right have nothing to offer but demagoguery and demonising people. The way we combat that, positive message, showing people how their lives can be better. And the Scottish Parliament is taking baby steps to show people how their lives can be better by investing in our NHS, by caring about our older people. And I think that's ultimately how we win, how we beat the lies, is by offering a better truth and a positive future.
Gosh, where to begin with this guy? So Trump tactics, well, I mean, I don't really know if it's actually tactics, rather than more the nature of either of the men's personalities. You know, there is a complete lack of self-awareness, a complete lack of empathy, an ability to believe whatever they feel they need to say at that moment and say it's the truth. So I think it's less tactics and just, you know, really almost a pathological narcissism that they feel they can just do whatever they want. And I think the fact that both of them were brought up in privilege is part of that issue, that they probably have a view of little people like us, which is completely dismissive. And I find it quite sad, actually, because I listen to them and you know, I mean, Donald Trump doesn't even realise that most people laugh at him because he's so ridiculous. And Boris is kind of getting the same reputation. I think the best comment that I've had about Boris, I keep calling them Boris Jump and Doris Trump and various things. But I had this comment when we were out campaigning up Benarty about Boris when I was talking to a voter, and I said, "What do you think of Boris Trump?" He said, "You can finish the sentence for me. Boris Trump can get to." So, you know, that's a really raw statement of how people view him, and if you reflect on that and compare it to the question he was asked about, what's your relatability? And I mean, the man couldn't even string a sentence together in response to that, which kind of tells its own story. But, you know, the example that Scott gave about UK Fact Check, I see that as no different to Better Together. You know, Better Together, I'd freely admit that they lied the whole way through the campaign to win their vote. Murray Foote, I think, you know, he was the editor at the time of the Record when they published The Vow, now supports independence. And, you know, that development of the dishonesty in political debate, I think we've seen through much earlier in Scotland because of Better Together. I think the rest of the UK is just catching up with Brexit. That's possibly why we saw through the whole sham of Brexit that it was because we've had that experience. You know, I think looking at the whole thing in perspective, though, the EU is not perfect. You know, I mean, it's a capitalist program, and there are lots of things I do not like about the way it does business. But certainly in terms of the social policies that have come from that, I think we would be well to kind of stay there for the future. Anyway.
And then I think this one was for you first, Neil, Sandy's question on the SNP and the grassroots movement.
Yes. Yes. Yes, we. I think there was a shift we all cried the weekend, and then we saw the member numbers going up, and we all started to maybe cheer up a little bit, and I drank all my whiskey, and then on the Tuesday night we had a gathering of all of the YES activists, and it was really exciting, and it was probably one of the most exciting meetings we had, and we had members from all parties and none, Labour, Greens, SNP. And the SNP were the beneficiaries of that change in mood. I think that, I would say that we all need to have a focus to make that happen. And I think that's possibly been one of the reasons, is that the focus for the SNP has been to demonstrate through votes for the SNP that the appetite for independence is still there. And I think that may feel, from people outside the SNP, that they're kind of maybe not getting the attention that they feel they deserve. But I think that, I firmly believe that this election that we're in now, this is the start of the next independence referendum. And that's why it's so important to get in chat doors now, because we're going to start building up the picture of who's sympathetic, how people are switching. I would welcome anyone from any party who's willing to help me be the MP for this area to come out and chat doors with me, because it really is, even if you've never canvassed before and you want to dip your toe in the water, now's the time to get that experience built up, because we're going to have an awful lot of doors to knock next year. We really are, and we're going to have to really do it together. One of the things that I thought was really important in the last independence referendum was regular, informal social evenings where there was just a chance to chat to people that you knew, and new people could come along and have an easy introduction so that they knew someone before they went out canvassing or leafleting or things like that. And I think we need to build that enthusiasm back up, because it was one of the best times of my life, and the end of it was just desolating. It really was, and we cannot allow that to happen again.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fair characterisation of how things have gone since 2014. I just think, to a degree, the SNP have made it hard for activists. Trying to push through VAT cuts for frequent flyers, complaining about capitalism, but on the other hand, the Scottish Government giving millions to Amazon, which increased its profit by billions in the EU and paid hundreds of millions less in tax, that employs people on 0 hours contracts. That's where I was working on the eve of the independence referendum, and the place thoroughly depresses me. I've watched Richard Lyle, who's an SNP MSP for, I think, Hamilton, speak against equal protections for children from assault. I just think the SNP are held together because they're a broad coalition that fall under one banner, and that's pro-independence, and there's a lot of variation in the party beyond that. And I just think they've made it difficult for their own activists. I should have been easy pickings for the SNP. I should have joined up the day after we didn't get the referendum. I didn't. I chose the more difficult choice because I think it's right, and that we just offer a more positive vision for Scotland. Going into the next independence referendum, like the next campaign, I think it'll be interesting to see the sort of the difference in approaches that the SNP and the Greens take. I think that will be a massive strength to us, actually, if you have one party tacking more to the centre or centre-left, and another offering a fairly bold left-wing, arguably socialist vision for Scotland. It brings together a whole coalition that we didn't get last time. Ultimately, I think the willingness to get out there amongst the pro-independence base, it kind of bubbles over now. It's frothed. Like, we're ready to go. And I think national events have pushed us that way. I really can't wait to get started. I'm sure Neil's the same. This time, I think we have every chance of winning it. As much as activists might be put off, we should be here, we should be talking to people, listening to people, offering inspirational messages and taking people with us. That's how we're going to win. That's how we're going to win the next independence referendum.
Thank you, Scott. Okay. I'm just kind of conscious of the time and that there are written questions that are going to be taken as well. So what we're going to do is take the 3 written questions and then the candidates' closing statements, 3 minutes each, if that's okay. The first written question that I have is, there's a lot of talk about green initiatives, but what are you doing about the basics? 5, desperately need sustainable and affordable transport. A day return to Dundee by train costs £25, similar length journey to Edinburgh £15. These are not achievable costs for most, regardless of how green we'd like to be. The next one, to both candidates, Leslie Laird chairs the Mossmoran Working Group, which brings Mossmoran operators, Exxon and Shell, and government agencies round the table in open forum, the only forum to do so. Progress has been made through discussion within group meetings. If you are elected, will you continue the operation of the Mossmoran Working Group? And then the last one, short and sweet, what could you do to end 0 hours contracts?
The cost of transport and the kind of the green necessity of that. I went on a cruise with my dad in 2009 because my mum wouldn't go to Iceland because she thought it was going to be cold, and it wasn't. It was brilliant. But one of the places we stopped at was the Faroe Islands, and we got off the boat and it was a beautiful wee place, and we said, oh, how much is the bus? Oh no, the buses are free. All of the bus services are free. Oh, okay, it's a small place, but it's a really important principle. So everyone is able to get around this rural place for free because the buses are there. And, you know, that for me is the kind of model that we need to move towards. The fact that we've got our rail track controlled by Westminster, our trains controlled by a private contractor, and we're trying to get out of that arrangement so we can have a publicly owned operation of rail. And whilst Leslie Laird is campaigning for this, her party voted against bringing track and trains into public ownership in the Scottish Parliament. So I mean, it's quite extraordinary, but it's, you know, I mean, it's the Bain principle at play, I guess. But we need to be bold, and we need to be ambitious, and we need to start thinking very much about how we generate energy and how we move from the reliance on petrol and diesel engines and move to electric vehicles. I've got a diesel car and I won't replace it until I can get an equivalent car that's electric, because I'm not going to buy another gas guzzler. That's a promise I've made to myself. But the public transport aspect is not just about the green technology, it's also about equity and provision of transport to either people who have got lower incomes or more vulnerable. Having a free transport system, I think, is something that I would aspire to. It's something that would obviously cost, but as long as we are beholden to private corporations who run our transport services, they're always going to be looking for a profit. And I don't think that a service like that, if we're serious about climate challenges, can be won by corporations.
I'm a little bit disappointed at the question that green initiatives apparently don't connect with the basics of life. To be fair, that's as much our fault as anyone else's. Transport is the single biggest polluter in Scotland. I went through the programme for government the Scottish Government put out earlier this year. It has world-leading ambitious targets. Great, never meets them, but it has fantasy promises on carbon capture and storage technology, and carbon-free flight by 2031, I think it is. These are things that we can't guarantee are actually going to happen. They're miles away in the future. When it comes to the basics, Neil raised a really important issue. Scandinavian and Central European transport systems are miles ahead of us. It's our party policy that bus travel should be free. This allows economic opportunity to communities that aren't connected up, particularly rural busing services. That's very important. Not all young people and people who want to work have access to cars and are able to drive. I've been a commuter for the past 3 years, going from Kirkcaldy to Edinburgh. You don't have to tell me how much it costs. You don't have to tell me how disappointing it is to have your train not turn up or be cancelled at the last minute, knowing that you have to get a connecting train, a connecting bus on the other side. It's massively infuriating, and it's not a public transport system that's fit for the 21st century. It doesn't get people around, it grinds things to a halt. When it comes to provision of trains, well, I feel that clearly the free market is not doing us well in this. A lot of European nations have publicly owned companies that run their bus services, they run their train services. They run it to a profit, they run it efficiently. There's no reason Scotland can't publicly take over its own trains and do the exact same. Those are basics, everyday essentials, and I think they can be delivered by a Green New Deal. I'll just add at the end, it is a matter of priorities. The Scottish Government's committed, I think, 2 billion or 1.7 billion to the dualling of the A9. Now, about 20 million went in the transport bill to the Leavenmouth rail. Like that, all of a sudden, that connects people in the northeast of Fife and really deprived areas around Methil, which I think is the most deprived bit of Fife. It connects them to job opportunities in Edinburgh. It connects them to transport opportunities. It enriches people's lives, and it was really cheap to do. It's a matter of priority, whether we want to allow people to more people to drive on our roads, or we open up these opportunities. And we're absolutely committed to giving people that option, at the very least, allowing them to get around by train and bus when they've been prohibited by doing so in the past.
Next question is on the Moss Morning Working Group.
Thanks, James. I think it was James that asked that. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question because just before this election was called, when we all knew that it was going to be called, but we just didn't quite have a day, I made a request to Leslie Laird to come along as a silent observer to that group so that I could get a feel for it and understand the value of it, because I felt this is a really important issue and I'd like to see how it was being tackled. And it was really frustrating. So first of all, she said, I'll need to check with the co-chair. And I said, okay, check with the co-chair, that's fine. And then she said, oh, industry, they have to check every single person before you get to come to a meeting. And I said, okay, well, if you tell me who to contact, I'll give them a bell and say, is it all right if I come along? And then a whole list of different excuses, one after the other. And then it eventually came out that Leslie just didn't want me there. And, you know, I've tried to think about this so carefully. It's very easy for me to say something disparaging, but actually I can't think of a single good reason why you wouldn't allow someone who's interested in an issue to come along to your meeting, not to participate, not to get up to any political shenanigans, but just to get a feel for what's being discussed. And I was very saddened by that. And so it's really difficult to answer that cleanly because I don't know what that group does. So I can't commit to something that I don't know anything about, that's been kept secret from me. And every time I've asked about it, it's like, oh no, you can't know about it, which I just think is ridiculous.
James and myself both do attend those meetings, as you know, and James, I don't recall ever being security checked to attend those meetings.
Myself.
And neither yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. I just thought I would add that in. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Rosemary.
So yeah, I mean, if I think, you know, if I'm elected, if I'm the MP, and I think that there are issues that need to be addressed, obviously there's the statutory group that's run by Ali Bain, the councillor up in Cowdenbeath. If there are issues that don't fit that and need to be taken forward, and I'm able to have conversations that are helpful to understand if that's the right forum to deal with them, then yeah, I wouldn't have any problem in doing something that will progress the situation in a helpful way. But it's frustrating that I can't give a detailed answer because there was a deliberate exclusion, and it wasn't just me. She made that decision for any candidate who was interested. We were not allowed to come.
Yes. So the question was, would you continue the operation of the group? I think it would be negligent of any local representative to not attend and really hear people out. Ultimately, I'd like to see chairmanship be somewhat neutral. I think an MP should put over their point of view, stick by it, and certainly chair the group. But it should be local people who really shape the narrative and shape the agenda around the issue. It's not for me to chair and set the issues that matter to people. That's for people to say, this matters to me, let's discuss it. And while you have the leaders or whoever's there representing ExxonMobil, why not give local people that opportunity? That's my approach. Pretty succinct. Allow local people to make the decisions. The whole point of grassroots democracy is allowing local people to claim a bit of power back over their lives.
Thank you. And then the last round of questions we're going to take tonight, what could you do to end 0 hours contracts?
Make them illegal.
I agree. New Zealand, unsurprisingly, New Zealand's done this. It has absolutely no detrimental effect to the economy. If employers want to offer 2 hours a week to their employees, they're free to do so. Employees will look for better opportunities elsewhere, and this guarantees more people in full-time work. It's ridiculous that this exists, the Dickensian idea that you can be told the night before, actually, you know what, you won't get any wages this week. I don't care about your mortgage, I don't care about your rent. We're completely suiting ourselves. The balance of power in this country has shifted, it seems irrevocably, and it's maddening. It's maddening to see it happen. It's maddening to be on the receiving end of it. It's ridiculous. It's got to go.
Okay, so we're now going to invite both candidates to do a 3-minute closing statement. So Scott, you went first last time, so Neil first.
I won't take 3 minutes because I think you've heard enough of my voice tonight. I mean, the bottom line is this election, as far as I'm concerned, is about the start of the next independence referendum. This is about getting Scotland's voice heard in Westminster, making our argument with power and authority with as many constituencies that are SNP, and to articulate very clearly that Scotland will have its choice and will have its say. Not a discussion. This is not a request. I think that there are robust legal arguments that will make that a reality, and as soon as Boris Johnson starts saying that's not going to happen, I just think, okay, add that to the die in a ditch list.
Yeah, I think Neil's right. Ultimately, constitutional issues completely mar this election, but it is a general election. Brexit is important, Scottish independence is important. I hope we ignore the first and take the latter option. But living wages, addressing the climate crisis, affordability of housing, waiting queues in the NHS, this is all important. And when I go around the doors, that's the things I'm talking about. I'm talking about everything that matters, because that's how you take people with you. A broad coalition with broad progressive ideas. And that's what I stand for this election. Thanks very much for coming.
Right, on behalf of the YES Kirkcaldy Hub, thanks to both candidates for coming along and giving us the benefit of their comments, shall we say. Unfortunately, as you know, we couldn't get the other parties to turn up, well, that's their loss. So thank you all very much for coming along, and have a very safe journey home. Thanks.
If any of you want to ask your other political candidates why they're not here tonight, get in touch with them on Twitter. They should not be getting away with this, especially an incumbent MP.